Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon in March 2022, while the world watched headlines about rising gas prices and inflation. Something extraordinary was happening in the vaults of central banks around the globe. Something that would signal the beginning of the most dramatic shift in the international monetary system since the collapse of Bretton Woods. Central banks purchased over 1,000 metric tons of gold in 2022, and they did it again in 2023. And again in 2024, for 3 consecutive years, the world's financial guardians have been accumulating gold at a pace not seen in over 5 decades. Think about what that means for a moment. We're not talking about individual investors buying gold coins for their safe deposit boxes. We're talking about the most powerful financial institutions on Earth, the ones that control the printing presses set interest rates and hold the keys to entire economies suddenly scrambling to acquire as much of an ancient metal as they can get their hands on. Gold prices surged to record highs, briefly exceeding $4,300 per ounce in October 2025, marking gains that haven't been seen since the turbulent days of the late 1970s when stagflation gripped the Western world. But here's what makes this different. Back then it was panic. The National Bank of Poland didn't just dip its toe in the water. Poland added 90 tons of gold to its reserves in 2024, becoming the largest buyer among central banks, and they didn't stop there. Through 2025, they continued their buying spree with laser focus. The Czech National Bank has been buying gold every single month for 30 consecutive months. India brought home 100 tons of gold from London. The first time since 1991 they've repatriated their reserves. What do they know that you don't? Why are the smartest financial minds in the world, the ones with access to every economic indicator, every classified briefing, every whisper in the corridors of power, all reaching the same conclusion at the same time? The answer will change how you think about money, power, and the future of the global economy. To understand what's really happening, we need to go back to February 24, 2022. That's the day Russia invaded Ukraine. Within hours, Western nations responded not with tanks or missiles at first, but with something far more devastating to a modern economy. They froze Russia's foreign currency reserves. The United States and its allies froze $300 billion in Russian foreign reserves, essentially cutting off Russia's access to its own savings held in dollars, euros, and other Western currencies. It was financial warfare at its most sophisticated level. But here's the thing that kept central bankers awake at night. If it could happen to Russia, a nuclear power with one of the world's largest economies, it could happen to anyone. Imagine you're the head of a central bank in Turkey or India or Brazil. You've spent decades building up foreign currency reserves, your financial cushion, your rainy day fund, your shield against economic storms. And suddenly you realize that cushion isn't really yours. It's digital entries on computers in New York, London, and Frankfurt. And if your government does something the West doesn't like, that cushion could vanish with a few keystrokes. That's when the question started. What is money, really, if someone else can simply turn it off? What is sovereignty if your reserves can be frozen by another nation's decision? What is financial independence if your wealth exists only as ones and zeros on servers you do uncontrol? The answer came quickly, and it gleamed with a golden luster. Central banks currently hold approximately 36,000 metric tons of gold. And for the first time since 1996, they now hold more gold than U.S. Treasury securities. Read that again. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, central banks collectively trust a metal dug from the earth more than they trust the debt of the world's largest economy. But why gold? In an age of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and cryptocurrencies, why would sophisticated financial institutions return to a relic from humanity's past? The answer reveals a truth about power that technology cannot change. For nearly 80 years, the US dollar has reigned supreme as the world's reserve currency. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement effectively made the dollar as good as gold. And in many ways, better, because you could earn interest on it. This arrangement gave the United States an extraordinary privilege. When other countries needed dollars for international trade, they had to earn them by selling goods and services to America or accumulating them through their trade surpluses. But America could simply print them. It's like having a credit card that never gets declined, no matter how much you spend. Economists call it exorbitant privilege, and it has been the foundation of American economic dominance for generations. But empires built on privilege often forget that privilege must be maintained through trust. The US dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has declined from over 70% in 2000 to around 58% by 2024. That might not sound dramatic, but in the world of reserve currencies, it's an earthquake in slow motion. The conflict playing out is as old as civilization itself, the eternal tension between the promises of power and the reliability of tangible value. On one side stands the dollar backed by the full faith and credit of the US government, supported by the world's most powerful military and woven into the fabric of global commerce. On the other side stands gold backed by nothing except 5,000 years of human psychology and the immutable fact that it cannot be created by decree or destroyed by policy. And right now, gold is winning. The battlefield extends far beyond balance sheets. Consider what is happening. Poland's defiant stand. The National Bank of Poland did unjust buy gold. They made a statement. Governor Adam Glapivsky has been a vocal proponent of raising Poland's gold allocation to 20% of total reserves, and by Q1 2025, they had exceeded that goal, now holding 21% of their reserves in gold. For a country that spent decades under Soviet domination and now sits on NATO's eastern frontier, the message is clear: we will never again allow our financial security to depend entirely on the goodwill of others. China's patient strategy. The People's Bank of China is believed to hold more than 5,000 tons of monetary gold in Beijing, more than twice what has been publicly disclosed. China isn't buying gold for diversification. China is buying gold for a world where the dollar's dominance has ended. India's repatriation. When India brought home 100 tons of gold from London in 2024, they weren't just moving metal. They were declaring that in an age of financial weaponization, physical possession matters more than custodial agreements. The conflict isn't just economic, it's existential. It's about who gets to decide what money is, who controls the financial architecture of the future, and whether power will remain centralized in the West or diffuse across a multipolar world. And the casualties of this conflict are already mounting. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $36 trillion. Interest payments on the debt are projected to consume more than 20% of government revenue by 2025. Meanwhile, America's ability to impose its will through dollar-denominated sanctions is declining with each passing month as more countries arrange trade in alternative currencies. Russia and China now conduct over 90% of their bilateral trade in rubles and yuan. India and several Middle Eastern countries are discussing oil payments in rupees and dirhams. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have expanded to include Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia, creating an economic bloc that represents nearly half of the world's population. The unipolar moment is ending. The question isn't whether it will end, but how violently. Now, let's bring this home to where you live. You work hard for your money. Every paycheck represents hours of your lifetime away from your family, energy expended, skills deployed. You save diligently, maybe 10% or 15% of what you earn. You invest prudently, perhaps in a 401k or an IRA. You check your account balance and feel a sense of security when you see those numbers grow. The truth that is keeping policymakers awake at night is the same truth that should concern every person with a bank account. In a digital age, your wealth is only as secure as the political stability of the institutions that hold it. Consider what happened during the banking crisis of 2023. In the span of a weekend, Silicon Valley Bank, the 16th largest bank in America, collapsed. Depositors woke up on Monday morning to find their money frozen. The FDIC stepped in, but for a terrifying 72 hours, billions of dollars were in limbo. Now imagine that scenario playing out not with one bank, but with the entire currency system. This isn't theoretical fear-mongering. People in Lebanon saw their bank accounts lose 90% of their value during the 2019 to 2021 financial crisis. Cypriots in 2013 woke up to find their accounts had been bailed in, meaning the government simply took a percentage to rescue failing banks. So what does all of this mean for you, for your family, for your financial future? Let me give you both the hard truths and the actionable insights. The lesson, trust has a price. The fundamental lesson of 2022 to 2025 is that trust, once given freely to the dollar-based system, now comes at a premium. The World Gold Council's 2025 survey found that 95% of central banks expect global gold reserves to increase in the next 12 months, with 43% planning to boost their own holdings. When 95% of the world's most informed financial institutions agree on anything, you'd be foolish to ignore it. The lesson has three parts. First, counterparty risk is back. For decades, it seemed like money held in banks, bonds, or foreign reserves was perfectly safe. The system worked and trust was implicit. That era has ended. Now every asset carries political risk. Dollars can be frozen, euros can be seized. Digital assets can be controlled. Only physical assets in your possession are truly yours. Second, diversification isn't just smart, it's survival. The old portfolio rule of 60% stocks and 40% bonds assumed a stable monetary system. That assumption is crumbling. Modern diversification means holding assets across different systems of value, fiat currencies, precious metals, real estate, productive businesses, and yes, even some allocation to cryptocurrencies despite their volatility. Third, the network effects of the dollar are degrading. Once upon a time, you used dollars because everyone else used dollars. That circular reinforcement made the dollar unassailable. But network effects work in reverse too. As more countries trade in alternative currencies, as more central banks diversify away from treasuries, each marginal shift makes the next shift easier. We're watching a tipping point approach. The predictions, 3 scenarios for the next decade. Let me lay out 3 scenarios for where this goes. Ranked from most to least likely. Scenario 1, managed multipolar decline, 60% probability. The most likely outcome is a continued, managed decline of dollar dominance over the next decade. The dollar share of reserves has already dropped from over 70% to around 58%, and this trend continues at 1 to 2% per year. In this scenario, gold continues rising, reaching $5,000, $7,000 per ounce by 2030. Central banks maintain their buying pace of 800 to 1,200 tons annually. Regional currency blocks strengthen, the yuan in Asia, the euro in Europe, perhaps a digital currency shared among BRICS nations. The US maintains significant economic power but loses the exorbitant privilege of printing the world's reserve currency. This means higher interest rates to attract foreign capital, reduce government spending or higher taxes to service debt, a lower standard of living for average Americans as cheap imports become less cheap. For individuals, this means gradually reallocating portfolios toward hard assets. A position in precious metals, perhaps 10 to 20% of investable assets, becomes not speculation but insurance. Real estate in stable regions holds value. Productive skills become more important than financial engineering. Scenario 2, crisis-driven reset 25% probability. The second scenario is darker. A currency crisis forces a rapid reset of the international monetary system. This could be triggered by a debt crisis in the US, a hot war between major powers, or a cascade of bank failures in over-leveraged economies. In this scenario, gold explodes to $10,000 plus per ounce as the ultimate safe haven. Currencies experience violent devaluations. International trade contracts sharply. Central banks meet for emergency negotiations to establish a new monetary architecture, perhaps backed partly by gold. Perhaps incorporating SDRs, special drawing rights. Perhaps creating an entirely new international reserve asset. This is the scenario that keeps central bankers buying gold despite record-high prices. They're not buying for return, they're buying for survival. When the house is on fire, you don't haggle over the price of water. For individuals, this scenario demands more aggressive preparation, reducing debt, increasing physical asset holdings, building resilience in local communities, developing skills that remain valuable during economic turbulence. Scenario 3, status quo persists, 15% probability. The least likely scenario is that the dollar maintains its dominance and gold's rise proves temporary. Perhaps the US undertakes genuine fiscal reform, reducing its debt-to-GDP ratio and restoring confidence. Perhaps geopolitical tensions ease, making the weaponization of the dollar seem like a temporary aberration. Perhaps technological innovation creates such enormous productivity gains that debt becomes manageable. I put this at only 15% probability because the structural forces working against it are so powerful. The US political system shows little capacity for the kind of fiscal discipline required. Geopolitical competition with China is intensifying, not easing. And the very act of freezing Russian reserves created a precedent that can't be uncreated. Still, surprises happen. Black swans fly both ways. What you can do, practical steps regardless of which scenario unfolds. Here are actionable steps based on what central banks are actually doing. 1. Understand gold's role. Central banks are not treating gold as an investment for returns, but as confidence infrastructure that serves broader systemic stability objectives. You should think similarly. A position in gold or silver isn't about getting rich, it's about preserving wealth through monetary transitions. Consider allocating 5 to 25% of your portfolio to precious metals, with the exact amount depending on your risk tolerance and time horizon. Physical metal in your possession has different properties than ETFs or mining stocks. Both have roles, but understand the difference. 2. Reduce exposure to long-duration government debt. Central banks are doing this by shifting to gold. You can do it by reducing holdings of long-term bonds, especially those denominated in currencies of countries with high debt loads and political instability. 3. Build real skills and relationships. In times of monetary instability, human capital becomes more valuable than financial capital. Skills that create real value: engineering, medicine, agriculture. Skilled trades maintain worth regardless of currency fluctuations. Networks of trust become more important than networks of finance. 4. Geographic diversification. Consider holding assets in multiple jurisdictions. This doesn't mean you need to become an international man of mystery, but having some exposure to different legal and monetary systems provides resilience. 5. Stay informed, but don't panic. The transition we're witnessing will unfold over years, possibly decades. Central banks have been buying gold for 3 years and plan to continue. This gives you time to adjust gradually rather than making panic moves. The bottom line, we re-entering uncharted water. Central banks collectively now hold more gold than U.S. Treasury securities for the first time since 1996, with holdings reaching approximately 36,700 tons and representing about 27% of foreign central bank reserves, the highest percentage in 29 years. This isn't a blip. This is a trend that's been building for 3 years and shows no signs of stopping. The central banks of the world are voting with their wallets, and they're voting for gold over dollars. They're preparing for a world where the rules of money are being rewritten, where financial sovereignty means more than global integration, where trust is earned, not assumed, where ancient stores of value reassert themselves over modern promises. The question you need to ask yourself is simple. If the people who control trillions of dollars, who have access to the best information and analysis in the world, who literally write the rules of the financial system, if they're all moving in the same direction, shouldn't you at least consider doing the same? The gold rush of 2024 to 2025 isn't about gold. It's about trust, it's about sovereignty. It's about preparing for a future that looks fundamentally different from the past 80 years. And that future is arriving faster than most people realize. The central banks are buying gold not because they predict the system will fail, but because they know it's already changing. They're not panic buying, they're strategically positioning for the world that comes next. The smartest move you can make is to pay attention to what they're doing, not what they're saying. Their actions speak louder than any official statement or press release. The message is clear, the old rules are dying. New rules are being written. And gold, ancient, immutable, and immune to the whims of politicians, is reclaiming its place at the center of the monetary system. The only question is, will you be ready when the transition accelerates? Because ready or not, it's coming. Final thought. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window, ending the dollar's convertibility to gold. It was called temporary. 54 years later, central banks are quietly rebuilding that link not through official policy, but through their buying decisions. History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And right now, it's rhyming in gold. The age of unchallenged fiat dominance is ending. The age of monetary multipolarity is beginning. And the central banks of the world are making sure they re on the right side of history when the music stops. Are you?